1. The Matrix and the U.S. Constitution posted by Shasta less than send email greater than date, Friday the 14th of August 2009 14 hours 33 minutes and 13 seconds The Matrix and the U.S. Constitution by No name hidden for his safety. Introduction. During my 12 years service as a judge, I always insisted on the truth and placed justice above law and order. I could have prepared this article indicia of a research paper, however, people tend to lose interest when articles of this nature become too technical. Science has taught us that, for every action there is a positive reaction. If your life on Earth resembles a matrix, it is because you, seeing things for the first time, with eyes wide open, but you feel confused. That feeling of confusion is appropriate because the information you are now digesting contradicts much of the information you have been spoon-fed throughout your life. I named this paper after the movie, The Matrix, written by the Wachowski brothers. After reading this, watch the movie and you will notice many similarities. In 2002, my brother ran into a problem with the IRS, and to help him out, I began to research the tax code. One thing led to another, and suddenly I was uncovering information about our government, which was directly in conflict with the U.S. Constitution and what I have been led to believe throughout my life. In time I began to interface with people from every state in the Republic, who were doing the same thing I was doing, some for the same reason and others for different reasons. We began to trade our research, and the facts I uncovered were totally in contradiction to the history of America which had been taught to us in public school and the principles of law I had absorbed during my service as a judge. I began to assist people to prepare and file suits in the courts, and I filed several of my own. At one point, because of the information I am about to provide to you, I became extremely depressed. After about 3 months, I eventually shook it off and continued on with my research. My hope in writing this is to help you, the reader, make sense of it all, which will require you to wash your mind clean of the brainwashing you were subjected to by our government-controlled public schools and churches, and re-educate yourself. When you understand the actions, the reactions will make sense, and it should anger you. Eventually, you will have a choice to make, a choice that will define how to survive life in the Matrix. In The Matrix, nothing is real, however, your mind has been conditioned to believe it is real. The Matrix is far too big to defeat, no one can escape it, and we haven the means our intelligence to beat those in control. Through my research, I discovered that America is a society of functional illiterates. I remind you that this is not my opinion, I am just the messenger. The people in charge of the Matrix represent the most powerful and intelligent humans on Earth. When gifted children appear in the public schools of the world, they are courted with scholarships, money, and eventually memberships into secret societies. They will be introduced to very persuasive intellectuals, who will convince these young gifted people that it is their place and duty to be a part of the elite who rule the world's population, because the rest of the world's population is too stupid to make decisions for themselves. Their comment, not mine. When the New World Order is officially and openly in control, only the extremely intelligent will be allowed to propagate. Everyone else will be sterilized or murdered through staged pandemics, used to eliminate excessive populations. Every foreign revolution, the World Wars, the Depression, Prohibition, Korea, Vietnam, the Middle East conflict, and the influenza epidemic during World War I were planned and orchestrated by these people. Many early writers researched much of this history and were forced to fund their own publication and the distribution of their work. Most 3. Never received the acclaim they deserved and never knew our government was responsible for their failures. I am prepared to supply anyone interested with mounds of research in support of what I have written herein. When they conveyed parts of this information in court documents, the opposition's lawyer responds to their clients that I am just crazy, and if the judge is within earshot of that comment, he will nod his head in judicial agreement. Well, I guess that caps it. If a lawyer and a lawyer judge both contend that I am crazy, then I must be crazy. They wouldn't lie to you. Or would they? The motive of our founding fathers was totally self-centered. It was their personal greed that inspired them to accept the task of writing the Constitution of the United States and not patriotism. In actuality, the United States is not a land or a place. It is a corporation, a legal fiction that existed well before the Revolutionary War. See Republica vs. Sween, 1 Dallas 43 and 28 U.S. C. 3002-15. The Constitution of the United States was written in secret by the Founding Fathers and was never presented to the colonists for a vote. Surely, any document as important as this demanded the approval of the people it governed. Well, it wasn't presented for a vote because the Constitution wasn't created for we the people. It was created by and for the Founding Fathers, their family, heirs and their posterity. The Constitution is a business plan, and any reference contained within it that appears to be the safeguard of a right is there because none of the Founding Fathers trusted each other. The safeguards were intended to prevent any one or group of them from cutting out the others, proving that there is no honor among thieves. Americans are not unlike all other humans who inhabit the earth. All human beings possess malleable minds, which are minds that can be shaped and controlled, and when government shapes and controls a mind, it is called brainwashing. Brainwashing causes the subject to become functionally illiterate. In America, our functional ignorance 4. excels in the areas of history, government and law, which really are one in the same. 98% of the officials in public office are lawyers, and these so-called representatives set policy and create the laws that govern this society. Their use of Greek and Latin terms in law and the habit of changing definitions and usage of common words is intentional. The intent is to confound and confuse the general public and to hide the treason they are implementing, and so that members of the public are forced or decide to hire a lawyer out of frustration, rather than try to represent themselves in our fictional courts of law. As you read on, I'll explain to you why and how our courts and laws are fictional. There has never been a law on the books created by the Congress which made it illegal for a common man to practice law. Every judge of a district, circuit or appeal court, except justices and magistrates, is a lawyer and a member of the bar. These judges have the authority to establish local rules of court, and those mentioned have created a local rule that prevents common people from representing any other person in their court or to practice law without a license. A license requires that you produce your bar association number. For those who don't know, the bar association is simply a lawyers' union, and when lawyers are accepted into the bar, they are required to swear allegiance to a foreign power. The American Bar Association is a branch of a national organization titled the National Lawyers Guild Communist Party, and can be found recorded in the United States Code at 28 U.S. C. 3002, Section 15A. They have become so big and entrenched that they no longer fear reprisal. Whenever I tell people that there is no actual law that makes it a crime to represent another person in court, their reaction is, liar. I remind them that Abraham Lincoln and Clarence Darrow never went to law school or passed the bar, but their reaction is understandable because the bar is a very powerful organization and its members have infiltrated every niche of American life and business. How many times in your life have you heard, you can practice law without a 5. license? They heard it said in numerous movies spanning 100 years, in my mother's soaps and by comedians in jokes and in theatrical skits. They seen the phrase in print in newspaper articles, magazines, and heard it on the radio. Before I learned the truth about this fact, even my personal lawyer made that comment to me. We all have been brainwashed to believe a lie, and because they heard it so often from people we trust, and who are supposed to have our best interest at heart, we all just assume it must be true. How many other lies have you assumed must be true? Our America society has been lied to by their sick government and lawyers more times than you will sign your name in your lifetime, and we have been indoctrinated, brainwashed, to believe that the Constitution was created for we the people. The purpose behind these lies is to make you believe that you are free, safe, protected and secure, and it is all an hallucination. How many of you have studied each line of the Constitution, the statutes at large and the Articles of Confederation, armed with a reputable dictionary or a law dictionary from that era? If you take the time to do this, you will soon discover that the true purpose of the Constitution was to create a business plan and to establish a military government for the protection of the Founding Fathers, the King's commerce, protection of his agents and the future control of his subject slaves. Even the preamble of the U.S. Constitution is a clue to the lie in which states, to ourselves and our posterity. If you never saw the title, the Constitution, and you were never told what this document was about, what do you think would be your first impression upon hearing or reading, to ourselves and our posterity? The Constitution is not for we the people, and America is a matrix of misinformation. In the eyes of those in control, America is nothing more than a large plantation and we the people are the slaves. In many U.S. and world treaties, the term high contracting powers is used to define your masters. Everyone else is considered by them to be their slaves. 6. All of the Founding Fathers had two things in common. They all shared the gift of a good education or were gifted individuals, and they all came from families of business and/or substance. These men all suffered from visions of grandeur. They viewed America as their one opportunity to make themselves powerful and wealthy, to ourselves and our posterity. Initially, their plan was to steal America away from the king, despite the fact that King George funded the exploration of the New World, which legally gave him first claim to all new continents discovered. The seizure of the Americas by the King's explorers was not as it has been depicted in our history books, presented to us by our government, in our government-controlled public schools. Native Americans, the Indians, were murdered, their villages burned, many were enslaved, infected by diseases brought from England and their lands taken by force and the threat of force by these early explorers. The Indians were labeled savages by these immigrant explorers from England, but the true savages were our English ancestors. One thing the Founding Fathers did not know, was that all of the King's lands and all future acquisitions such as the Americas, had been given and pledged by King John to Pope Innocent III and the Holy Roman Church by the Treaty of 1213. After that fact was proven to the Founding Fathers, King George and representatives from the Vatican decided to use the constitutional draft created by the Founding Fathers to further their plan to control the colonists. Control attained by bringing the colonists to their knees in debt. Any way you read it, the Constitution was never written with the intent of benefiting the American people. Did you know that 98% of the law schools in America and England do not include constitutional law as a part of their law curriculum? The reason for this phenomenon is because constitutional law does not apply to, or affect, the enforcement of statutes, codes or administrative regulations, which have replaced constitutional law, the common law, public law and penal law, and which have been designed to control you. For example, constitutional. 7. Law is taught as an elective at Harvard, Yale and Cambridge, and only for students of law who are planning a future career in government. This should make sense to you as you read on. In the true history of America, neither side won the Revolutionary War. At first, the appearance of English troops in the colonies was simply a show of force by King George, intended to intimidate the colonists and force them to pay him taxes. Factually, back in England, English soldiers refused to take up arms against the colonists because they were English citizens and relatives. Mr. Mayer Amschel Bauer, founder of the Rothschild banking empire, by this time owned the king. Mr. Bauer had extended unlimited credit to the king and arranged contracts with him, which permitted the Rothschild tax collectors to represent and collect the king's tax from the king's subjects. This is the origin of the concept behind the establishment of the IRS. It was Bauer who suggested to King George that he enforce a tax against the colonists in the New World, since the tax being collected in England was barely enough to pay the interest on the king's loans. When English soldiers refused to fight, Mr. Bauer negotiated a contract with unemployed Russian Germanic soldiers to fight for King George at a cost of 50 cents a day. Bauer then informed King George that he had hired these soldiers in the king's name, but at a cost of $1 a day. King George utilized these soldiers, dressed them in English soldier uniforms and ordered his career officers to command them. When his show of force in the colonies failed, Mr. Bauer suggested that King George finance the colonists in their war efforts against him, and bring the colonists to their knees in debt. The king succeeded in accomplishing this through his appointed civilian figureheads in charge of his government of France. Mr. Bauer wanted to expand his banking empire into the colonies. He discovered that the colonists didn't trade in gold or silver but used scrip as the basis of their economy. The scrip money used were promissory notes printed by 8. The colonists. All the colonists agreed that they would consider these notes the lawful currency of the colonies. Mr. Bauer wanted gold or silver and induced the king to demand that his tax in the colonies be paid in gold or silver. It was that condition that broke the camel's back and caused the Boston Tea Party. Whoever controls the money, controls the country. Rothschild. Surreptitiously, King George infiltrated the colonies and their feudal attempt to form a new government, using spies composed of English lawyers and English aristocrats loyal to him. The spies' assignment was to infiltrate the new government, carry out the plan to defeat the colonists through debt and establish regular reports to the king. The church also had its appointed representative in place to protect and ensure that its interest was being observed. Much of the loans received from the French went into the pockets of the Founding Fathers. The Founding Fathers eventually conceded to King George and the Holy Roman Church's demands, by and through the intervention and persuasiveness of the king's spies. Ironically, the common denominator or glue that eventually bound King George, the Founding Fathers, the English lawyers and English aristocrats together was a secret society called the Illuminati. Even Paul Revere and Benjamin Franklin were members of the Illuminati. This secret society had a criminal and deadly past in Europe, and in America they were eventually renamed the Free and Accepted Masons. The majority of the regular membership of the Free and Accepted Masons do not know about the Illuminati influence within their rank and file. The Illuminati members operate out of special secret societies separate from the regular Masonic membership and are found in every branch of the Free and Accepted Masons of the world. Think about the colonists whom we have been taught to revere by our public school system. All of these individuals were members of this secret society and all were traitors. Our history books also instruct us to apotheosize the Founding Fathers, but don't. 9. Hold them in reverence, hold them in contempt. By and through their intervention, slaves you are and slaves you will ever be. An example of a man in history we have been taught to revere is Benjamin Franklin. Would it shock you to learn that he was on the king's payroll and his many trips to England were actually to report on the colonial government to King George? The Declaration of Independence is another story omitted from our American history books. Of the 51 men involved in the creation of the Declaration of Independence, 21 were actually traitors and on the king's payroll. During the Revolutionary War, English officers were provided the names, addresses and family members of the 30 loyalists involved in the creation and signing of the Declaration of Independence. The English soldiers had been ordered to hunt down and murder all 30 loyalists, their wives, children and all relatives, with further instructions to burn their bodies inside their homes. The soldiers were to leave no trace of these men and their families, to wipe out their existence for an eternity. The history of civilizations has taught us all that martyrs are dangerous to men of power, and King George didn't want to leave any martyrs. It is pretty obvious who provided the detailed information about the 30 loyalists, their family and addresses. At first glance, it appeared that Guy Madison of Virginia was so concerned about lawyers holding any position in American government that he championed the 13th Amendment, which barred lawyers from holding any public office in government. The 13th Amendment was ratified, but never made it into print in our government-controlled school books and public classrooms. The amendment was surreptitiously removed and replaced by the 14th Amendment. The 15th Amendment became the 14th, and so on. Madison's efforts appear admirable, but his later actions as a member of the First Congress suggest that his only real concern was 10. To block lawyers from undermining the theft that he and his compatriots had planned for America. Once the cost of the Revolutionary War sufficiently placed the colonists in debt, the English soldiers were ordered to dispense with their efforts, recover their arms, and within the next 8 years they eventually returned to England. The colonists were so glad to see the fighting stop that they allowed the soldiers to retreat and exit America peacefully. There is an old legal maxim that states, "The first to leave the field of battle loses." Pursuant to this maxim, the Founding Fathers proclaimed the colonists the victors. A maxim is a legal truth that is time-honored and incorruptible. In reality, the war was just a diversion. The colonists had no chance of succeeding in their efforts. Examine the facts for yourself. During this era, England had the largest army and navy in the world. King George owned England, Ireland and France, having a combined population of about 60 million subjects. The colonists were poorly educated, poorly armed, and composed of farmers, tradesmen, bonded slaves, women and children, and boasted a total population of only 3 million subjects. And considering the undermining that was occurring to their nation by the King's spies and the Founding Fathers, the colonists didn't have a prayer of defeating the English. Americans have been indoctrinated by our federal and state governments and through government-controlled public schools and literature, government-controlled media and government-controlled churches, yes, even the churches, to believe that America defeated the English. We celebrate that victory and our so-called independence each year on the 4th of July, and it is all a bunch of propaganda, a carrot to lead the horse and keep this society stupid and passive. We boast today that our country represents the finest schools in the world, but in reality, we know smarter than the first colonists. We only know more about other things because of new technology developments during the last 250 years, and yet the average IQ of America is 70. 11. Documented proof that the Constitution was not for us can be found at Paddleford, Fay and Company vs. The Mayor and Aldermen of the City of Savannah, 14 Georgia 438, 520. This was a court case wherein the plaintiffs sued the City of Savannah for violating what they believed were their constitutionally protected rights. The decision of the judge says it all, but indeed, no private person has a right to complain, by suit in court, on the ground of a breach of the Constitution. The Constitution, it is true, is a compact, but he, the private person, is not a party to it. Emphasis added. The United States Constitution was converted into a trust, and the legal definition of a trust is a legal obligation with respect to property given by one person, donor, to another, trustee, to the advantage of a beneficiary, Americans. The property in this trust includes all land, your personal possessions that you believe you own, and your physical body. The donor of the trust is the King of England and the Holy Roman Church. The trustees are all federal and state public officials, which means that they truly are agents of a foreign power, the King and the Vatican. The reason the Constitution was converted into a trust is because, as a non-trust business plan, the Constitution completely bound the hands of our government officials. By their converting it into a trust, our public officials were then free to make any changes they desired to this government without their constituents' knowledge. The rules of a trust are secret, and no trustee can be compelled to divulge those rules, and the rules can be changed by the trustees without notice to the beneficiary. The one pitfall confronting them and their plan was the fact that by converting the Constitution into a trust, Our public officials had to legally assign a beneficiary, and the beneficiary chosen could not offend or be in contrast to the numerous international treaties that were in force. Our public officials wanted to stay in control of the trust.